Hi everyone, I'm Maria McLachlan and welcome to part 2 of my review of Matt Walsh's documentary. I see the first video I made got a huge diversity of responses, though many made the same point over and over. This is the latest incarnation. So I want to clarify that I am all too well aware that it is the so-called left and the liberals in the US who are promoting the nonsense that is gender identity and how it should be prioritized over the material reality that is sex. I also know that it is mostly conservatives who are opposing it. It is certainly not the case that only conservatives are fighting this in America, because I know a lot of radical feminists are too. The point I was trying to make is that left-wingers and liberals who see this as a progressive issue and therefore an obvious one for them to fight for are wrong. It is not a progressive issue, and I did explain why. I recall King Critical suggesting that trans identity itself might be seen as a postmodern extension of contemporary capitalism, and I think that's probably true. My criticism of Matt is that he uses it as a stick to beat the left with, and that is divisive. In the documentary, he obviously does interview several people on the right side of this issue, like Dr. Miriam Grossman and Deborah So and Jordan Peterson and Chris Elston from Canada. But none of them speak from a radical feminist perspective. Old school and radical feminists are fighting back so hard in the US and in Canada, but they are not getting the coverage they deserve, and I think that's probably because of people like Matt Walsh and the Daily Wire. Okay, on to the main business. I watched Matt Walsh's film twice. The second time I made notes, and as I'm looking at the notes, I'm thinking, if someone had shown these notes to me, say 10 years ago, I'd probably think they were the product of a very sick mind or someone on drugs hallucinating. I mean, nobody really says this stuff, do they? For reasons of time, because I don't like making long videos, I find it hard to talk for too long, I've decided to, in this part, confine myself to talking about just one of the people Matt interviewed, and I'll make another part about a few of the others in future. Okay. Gert Comfrey is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Nashville. Ever the skeptic, I like to double check things, especially if they are in documentaries made by people I don't entirely trust, so I found out what Gert Comfrey says about herself, and sure enough, she has extensive experience working with transgender clients and clients wanting to explore gender identity, along with letter writing for gender affirming surgeries. Now that's important. So she has a life-changing power, and as some would say nowadays, a life-shattering power. It was left to Jordan Peterson, shown later on in the film, to make the very obvious point that it is not a therapist's job to affirm gender or presumably any other idea their client may have about themselves, whether it's that they are overweight or that they are ugly or that they are unlikable or a failure at everything in life or whatever. His words were, "It's not up to me to affirm what you think. You don't get a casual pat on the back from the therapist for your pre-existing axiomatic conclusion. That's not therapy, that's a rubber stamp." Spot on, so nicely put. Peterson seems to be one of those old-fashioned psychologists who thinks therapists should help you explore your thoughts and feelings in order to help you understand why you have them and to work with you to find ways to help you feel better, or something like that. We are seeing more and more young people detransitioning and saying that they did not get the exploratory therapy that they needed. Sometimes they come from backgrounds of neglect or abuse or trauma. They have what appear to be pretty obvious reasons for their depression, their anxiety, their suicide ideation. And these are not touched on in gender affirmative therapy. I mentioned Kira Bell last time. She came from what sounds like quite a dysfunctional and neglectful home with an alcoholic mother and an absent father, and she suffered from severe depression. She went to the Tavistock Clinic in London, and she says, "After a series of superficial conversations with social workers, I was put on puberty blockers at age 16. Then it was wrong sex hormones, and then it was a double mastectomy at age 20. Sinead Watson went to the Sandyford Clinic in Glasgow. Once she had an appointment, she says, the process of getting hormones was astonishingly simple. Obviously, I'm furious about it now, but at the time I was pleasantly surprised at how uninvasive the questions were. It was like casual conversation." Sinead was repeatedly sexually assaulted in her teens, but those traumatic experiences never came up in her appointment with a therapist who had the power to refer her for life-changing medical interventions. And it's not just in the UK. There are many more, and you can find links to some of their stories on the detransition page of my website. So I agree with Jordan Peterson. The role of a therapist in helping someone who is genuinely, specifically distressed about being the sex they are is to help them understand why they feel that way and whether there is any way of helping them come to terms with what they are before consigning them to a lifetime of medication, surgeries, and everything that goes with them. And yet, the enemies of reason and humanity call this kind of sincere exploratory therapy conversion therapy. I want to give a shout out to Joe Burgo, who is an American clinical psychologist of nearly 40 years experience, and he was recently interviewed on the YouTube channel called A Wider Lens, and he articulated something I had already kind of surmised to be the case from listening to detransitioners.
I see that dynamic a lot in the desire to transition and if I've listened to how many hours of Benjamin Boyce interviews, hearing all these people say this exact thing. I thought I was going to leave that all behind. I thought I would leave behind all my damage, all my shame, all my anxiety, and I was going to become this new and improved version of myself. That to me is at the heart of this drive for many people, not for everybody, but for many people to transition. It's the idealized cure for all sorts of problems.
Makes sense, doesn't it? And just to clarify my own opinion, someone recently suggested that I thought people transition for giggles. No. I think a tiny minority have some kind of dysphoria or body dysmorphia, and I believe they are deeply unhappy with being the sex they are, either because of the expectations placed upon them or because of their revulsion, their disgust at their sex bodies, or both, or some other reason, internalized homophobia perhaps, and they believe they would have been happier if only they'd been born the other sex, and they are depressed and feel they can't go on as they are. I do believe that, but I think many more come into the category that Joe Burgo describes. They have pre-existing mental health problems, and thanks to social media groomers, they latch on to the idea that changing their appearance and their name and claiming to be the other sex will make their problems go away. And I think there is a third group who are just doing it to feel special and oppressed, but they are not the ones taking hormones and having surgeries. I think those people tend to call themselves non-binary or gender fluid or some other silly label, and I think Gert Comfrey is one of those. By her own admission,
I'm not a woman, so I can't really answer that.
Gert Comfrey doesn't know what a woman is, so how can she affirm that somebody who says he is a woman is actually a woman? And as we saw in the trailer, whatever guff Matt came out with, like...
How do I know if I'm a woman? I like scented candles, and
Yeah.
I've watched Sex and the City.
Gert would just smile and say, yeah.
Yeah.
And...
That's a great question.
So how do I know?
Yeah, Matt, that question right there, right, that's the beginning of a lot of people's gender identity development journey.
Okay, now, obviously I don't go along with this concept of gender identity, and I think that phrase, gender identity development journey, more perhaps than any other, made me feel that this Comfrey woman, or non-binary person, or whatever the hell they is selling a product which is actually a scam, because there is no such product. There is no gender journey. The only journey they need to go on is the journey out of mental illness. In a tiny number of cases, medically changing their appearance may be the only thing that can help them. But the more I learn, the more skeptical I am about that, about it being the only solution. And is that what she would say to a client who happens to be a big bearded bloke saying he thinks he's a woman? Yeah. That'll be $100 and I'll see you again next Tuesday. Now, watch this.
From the minute I was assigned female, I was told, okay, these are the kind of clothing that you're going to wear, these are the type of play that you're going to engage in as a child, the path that maybe your life will take because of social expectation.
Replace the word assigned with the words observed to be female at birth, and I don't see how anyone could disagree with what she says here. What we can disagree with, and what anyone in their right mind, anyone who hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid and been brainwashed by the gender cult would disagree with, is that not wanting or liking the gendered expectations placed on her somehow means that she is not a woman, and not only that, but she can't even say what a woman is. This utter folly, which is so much a part of gender ideology, shows us how regressive it is and why it is dangerous, and why Gert Comfrey and therapists like her are potentially causing immeasurable harm. To be honest, Gert Comfrey sounds like someone who needs therapy herself, preferably not gender affirming therapy, because that will probably make her even more of a crackpot. I can't fault Matt Walsh's interview with Gert Comfrey, because she condemned herself with her own mouth and facial expressions. And I'm not saying that to be mean. To me, she actually does come across as a nice person, a sincere person, and someone capable of great empathy. I think she is likely to be a very good marriage or family therapist. The problem is that she is showing empathy for people with a fantasy, a delusion that can result in a catastrophic decision to make irreversible medical interventions, resulting in a lifetime of regret. She's being a rubber stamp. That's all. Thanks for watching.